On today's episode of Star Wars Factions Compared, we take a look at corvettes. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another episode of Star Wars Factions Compared. Today we'll be looking at the Zhaan Consortium, the Rebel Alliance, the Galactic Republic, and the Empire in order to determine which one has the best corvette. In this episode, it will be important to keep in mind the purpose of a corvette. They are ultimately support ships. In some cases, yes, a corvette will be used to directly assault a larger ship. However, generally they're used to screen against fighters or to take care of even smaller ships like gunships or other corvettes. We'll get started in just a second, but I know some of you guys may be wondering, what is the Zhaan Consortium? The Zhaan Consortium is a faction that first appeared in Star Wars Empire at War, Forces of Corruption. I'm actually doing a playthrough of that game on my second channel right now. It's super fun, there's lots of space battles and explosions, so if you want to check that out, I'll put a link in the upper right hand corner and down in the description. Let's get started with the Empire in the Raider 2 class corvette. This ship most famously appeared in canon, specifically in Star Wars Battlefront 2, and although this is a Legends-centric video, I will take its appearance in that game into consideration. The Raider, in my mind, is a relatively well-designed corvette, although there are no official weapons numbers. In a previous video, I've looked at the model for the Raider in the game and determined that it has 6 laser cannons, 2 medium double turbo lasers, and a concussion missile launcher. However, one thing I want to point out about this ship is that it's actually fairly well designed. It still suffers from the classic corvette issue of having its engines get in the way of its laser cannons, so it can't actually hit any target behind it. However, that's a common theme that we'll see throughout this video. Otherwise, its weapons seem to be in pretty good positions. It's very thin and sleek, so it's a small target, which is especially important considering it needs to take on enemy fighters. And I think importantly, it places a lot of emphasis on laser cannons. These weapons are very light and perfect for taking on starfighters, while larger turbo lasers are a bit more sluggish and will struggle in that capacity. I do, however, like that it also has the double turbo lasers and the concussion missile launchers, just in case it needs to take on a larger enemy ship. The Corvus in particular also seems to be relatively nimble and fast, again both things that we would want to see in our corvettes. It should be noted that in Star Wars Battlefront 2 we see that the ship does have a usable hangar and that it could hold at least several fighters. This, however, doesn't seem to be standard practice, so I'm not going to allow any fighters with it for this video. Next we have the Galactic Republic and their Consular class cruiser. Don't let the name fool you, although it is called a cruiser, it's definitely a corvette, coming in at only 115 meters, which is actually shorter by 35 meters than the Raider. The standard Consular wasn't actually much of a fighter, it only had one hidden weapon. However, during the Clone Wars, Consular classes went through a C-70 refit, which added several weapons. I've actually included this ship in my versus matchups before, where it won against the CR-90. However, that was in a straight head-to-head matchup. Today, instead, we're looking at which one serves as the best corvette. The refit Consular was actually fairly well armed. It had 5 turbo lasers, mostly placed in the same way that you see it on the CR-90, and then also a double laser cannon. However, what's kind of weird is that the laser cannon itself seems to be fixed in a forward-facing position at the front of the ship, so it's not going to be particularly useful for taking down enemy fighters, which is a real shame because the turbo lasers are actually placed in an excellent spot. It's the only ship on this list that can actually shoot behind it due to the placement of those rear turbo lasers. The turbo lasers themselves aren't super heavy, they're not as small as the ones on the CR-90, but they're not like something you'd see on a Star Destroyer. They don't have long barrels, they can probably swivel fairly quickly, they likely don't use that much power, so in emergency situations, they could be used to fend off fighters. However, I still think that dedicated laser cannons would make much more sense on this ship. I mean, the presence of heavy weapons does give it some versatility because it can attack larger ships, but I think that it's ill-suited for that role, and instead it's better to be specialized for a fighter screening role. Another thing worth thinking about is the fact that this ship is actually a refit, as is the CR-90, which we'll talk about later. It's hard to say what exactly this means for the durability of the ship, how it would stack up to a purpose-based battleship like the Raider. I'd say it's perhaps a little bit weaker, but that's not really something that's easily quantifiable. Unfortunately, we also don't know the speed stats, but I'd say given the size of its engine block when compared to the Raider, it's probably a little bit faster. Next we'll move to our newest faction, the Zhaan Consortium, and take a look at their Crusader class corvette. I don't want to tip my hand too early, but this to me seems to be one of the most effective, purpose-built corvettes in all of Star Wars. First of all, the Crusader was one of the fastest ships available during the Galactic Civil War. I'm pretty sure it could outrun any of the ships on this list, which makes it extremely effective at taking on starfighters. The thing is also covered with laser cannons. It basically fits as many on as it could, with 5 on each side of the ship, and then 1 on the top and 1 on the bottom, to make 12 in total. These laser cannons in this point defense system was also hyper advanced, precise enough to not only shoot down enemy fighters, but also incoming munition, like missiles or torpedoes. This made the Crusader extremely effective as a support ship within a larger fleet, which again, I think is the proper role for a corvette. Sure, it doesn't have any turbo lasers, but as long as it protects the larger ships in its group, it does its job effectively. I should note that the model I've been using to demonstrate the ship was created by Fractal Sponge. It's not an official Star Wars model, however I think it fairly well represents what the Crusader looked like, although the gun placement is slightly different. Finally, we have the most famous corvette in Star Wars fandom, the Rebel Alliance's CR-90. One of these ships, the Tantive or the Tantive V4, is the very first vessel which appears in a Star Wars movie. In my perfect fleet video, I argued that the CR-90 with some weapon swap outs, which I'll talk about later, would be my choice for a corvette. I think now, in hindsight, I'd likely switch it and go for the Crusader, but the CR-90 has some good bones to it. The CR-90 is extremely fast, it's well armored, and it's very, very modular. Parts of the ship can be swapped out depending on the function it's needed for. Weapon-wise, however, the stock CR-90 Corvette had a very strange configuration. Instead of using laser cannons, which would obviously be effective against fighters, the ship uses 2 dual turbo lasers, one on the dorsal and one on the ventral side of the ship, along with a total of 6 single turbo lasers. Now this is a lot of firepower. The ship is only 150 meters long, but with all this power, could probably beat up on some larger vessels. However, that's not exactly what we're looking for in a corvette. Sure, it can have a couple of turbo lasers, again that gives it some good versatility, but I still think its main focus should be on fighter screening. As I said in my perfect fleet video, if I were going to use the CR-90, I would switch out all of the guns except for the dorsal and ventral turbo lasers for laser cannons. This configuration would make the CR-90, in my opinion, a really excellent corvette. It's still okay as it is, but I don't see it faring very well against fast starfighters like TIEs. Sure, the turbo lasers are relatively small, but laser cannons will always be much more effective as point defense weapons. With that being said, let's take a second to rank these corvettes from worst to best. I just want to ask you guys, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, turn notifications on, and give it a like. It really helps me out, especially when January views are much lower than the rest of the year. Anyway, getting started, coming in at number 4 is the CR-90. As I said, this ship has good bones, but the standard weapon placement really makes no sense. Why not even have a single set of laser cannon? This makes the ship extremely vulnerable to fighters when the main role of a corvette should be supporting and protecting larger ships and screening against starfighters. To be fair, the Rebel Alliance seem to use it more in an anti-capital ship role. At Scarif and Endor, for example, we don't see the CR-90s focusing on fighters, but I still don't think it serves in the corvette role in its stock form very well. Coming in at number 2 is the Consular class cruiser, and much of what I said about the CR-90 also applies to this ship. It does have laser cannons, although they are fixed to the front of the ship and don't appear to be particularly movable. This means that the ship needs to totally reorient itself just to take on an enemy fighter. Next is the Raider, which I think has a really good mix of heavy and light weapon systems with 6 laser cannons, concussion missile launchers, and also turbo lasers. There's not much I would change about this ship. I wish that it could hit targets behind it, but to be fair, most of the ships on this list can't. If I had picked any other faction rather than the Zhaan Consortium, I think most likely that the Empire and the Raider would have came in at number 1. Speaking of, number 1 is of course the Zhaan Consortium and their Crusader class corvette. This is an excellent support ship. It's among the fastest ships in the galaxy, It's loaded to the brim with laser cannons, and it has a state-of-the-art point defense system. Literally, the only thing I would change is I would give it a couple of turbo lasers, which is sort of the opposite of the problem that some of the ships on this list have, just so, if needed, it could attack larger enemy capital ships. Still, I think the Crusader is basically the ultimate support ship, which is why it and the Zhaan Consortium get the #1 spot on this list. That, however, is just my opinion. Take a second and let me know which ship you think is the best Corvette. Vote in the upper right hand corner, and also let me know down in the comments section. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. If you want to support the channel, you can visit me on Twitter, Patreon, or Discord, and of course subscribe to my first and second channels. Thanks so much guys, as always, may the force be with you.